On July 21st, 1997, the body of a man was found in an alley in Gardena, California. The man had been beaten and set on fire. 2 weeks later, detectives received a call from a local woman who claimed she heard Susan Mellon confess to the crime. The woman alleged that Susan, with the help of a boyfriend, killed the man because he had been stealing from Susan's mother's house. During the investigation, it was discovered that the female informant was a well-known drug addict in the Los Angeles area and had given hundreds of false tips to law enforcement over the years. The female informant's own sister, who was also a police officer, told investigators on the case that her sister was a pathological liar and not a reliable witness. But the lead detective on Susan's case suppressed this information. And based solely on the written statement of this one woman informant, Susan Mellon was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 16 years later, attorneys for the group Innocence Matters in California reopened Susan's case. They found multiple statements from people describing the female informant as being a habitual liar. They also obtained a statement from one of the men who was there the night of the crime, who said Susan had no involvement in the murder. In 2014, Susan Mellon was released from prison after serving 17 years. On December 9, 1981, in a suburb of Sacramento, California, two men disguised as telephone repairmen entered the home of an elderly coin collector and his wife. The men tied up the coin collector and his wife, shot them both, then stole 6 suitcases full of silver coins. Not long after, an anonymous call led police to the men responsible. One of the men's wives told detectives that Gloria Killian was the one who had planned the robbery. When arrested, Gloria told investigators that she had never met the men who had committed the crime, and the men said they didn't know her. The charges against Gloria were dropped and she was released for lack of evidence. However, a month later, police arrested her again and charged her as being the mastermind behind the whole robbery. One of the men from the robbery had changed his statement and accused Gloria of being his co-conspirator. Based solely on his testimony, Gloria was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder, robbery, and conspiracy, and sentenced to 32 years to life. But in 1992, while in prison, Gloria met a California woman who believed she was innocent. The woman put up $100,000 of her own money to hire investigators to look into Gloria's case and into the man who had testified against her. Investigators found that the man had made a secret deal with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence. They also found a letter from the man to the prosecutor in which he admitted he had lied on the stand. In 2002, after 18 years behind bars, a court of appeals dismissed Gloria Killian's conviction, and she was released from prison. On April 16, 2001, 3 women pulled up in front of a house in South Los Angeles. One of the women got out of the car and approached a group of men who were standing in front of the house. She asked the men if they had seen a girl she was looking for. The men said no. As the woman turned to walk back to the car, she stopped, looked back, and fired one shot from a handgun into the group of men, hitting one of them and killing him. Witnesses described the shooter as a woman with a lazy eye and a thigh tattoo. At the same time of the shooting, Kiara Newsom was in class at her charter school, 13 miles away. The teacher for Kiara's class stated that Kiara had not left school all day and had turned in every assignment, but police still arrested Kiara for the shooting. At her trial, Kiara's teachers testified that the charter school was extremely strict on students and their attendance. All students had to wear uniforms and had to sign in and out of class, and no one was allowed to leave school grounds without permission. Kiara Newsom also didn't match the description of the shooter. She didn't have a lazy eye, and one of the men from the group identified a different woman than Kiara in the police lineup. But prosecutors alleged that Kiara could have snuck away from campus, changed out of her uniform, drove the 13 miles to commit the crime, then changed back into her uniform, before sneaking back onto school grounds. A jury agreed, and Kiera Newsom was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 60 years to life. But in 2013, a professor at Loyola Law School's Juvenile Innocence and Fair Sentencing Clinic took on Kiera's case. They investigated Kiera's case and found several witnesses who confirmed that Kiera was not the shooter and that she had been set up by alleged gang members. And in April of 2020, after serving 19 years, Kiera Newsom walked out of prison. On April 9th, 1989, Joanne Parks woke up to the sound of her 3 children screaming and her house on fire. She ran to her children's bedroom in an attempt to get her kids out, but the fire was too intense. She called 911 at a neighbor's house, but by the time police arrived, it was too late. All 3 of Joanne's children were killed in the fire. An initial investigation reported that the fire was accidental and most likely the result of an electrical source. But at Joanne's trial, investigators testified it was caused by arson. Joanne was convicted of first-degree murder of all 3 of her children and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. 22 years later, an arson review panel found proof that the original fire investigators who testified at Joanne's trial did not have a proper understanding of fire forensics, and most of their evidence that came from the crime scene was invalid. Thanks to the California Innocence Project, Joanne was granted a new trial, which prompted California's governor to grant her clemency. And in 2020, Joanne Parks was released from prison after serving 29 years. On June 6, 1980, 18-year-old Janet Dixon poured gasoline all over her body and lit herself on fire. Janet had been brainwashed into believing she was possessed by a demonic presence and that the fire was the only way to rid herself of demons. The woman responsible for convincing Janet she was possessed was a former neighbor who had molested Janet as a child and then kidnapped her when she was 14. This woman held Janet captive for years, physically, sexually, and mentally abusing her, and then told Janet that she had to perform an exorcism on herself by fire. But during Janet's attempt to burn away her demons, the kidnapper's 8-year-old biological daughter was accidentally killed in the fire. Instead of Janet's abductor being prosecuted for her role in the fire and for kidnapping, the woman became a witness for the prosecution and testified against Janet. Janet Dixon was convicted of arson felony murder and sentenced to death. In 2020, lawyers from Loyola's Project for the Innocent in California fought to prove that Janet never received a fair trial. They successfully proved that 3 experts who took the stand for the prosecution gave false witness testimonies, and that Janet's original sentence was unlawful. And after spending 40 years behind bars, Janet Dixon was released from prison.